Users of Reddit, what is the worst thing your teacher has ever said in front of a class? I remember sophomore year of high school, we had this seriously obnoxious kid who annoyed us every day. He would make some sexual joke, and like every joke became a dead horse, and complain how hard his life was in school and claimed that the teacher loved making us do this. Our teach had enough one day and snapped. He looked at him dead in the cock eye and yells, "You don't know what crap I put up with, you little effer!" To give clarification, this teacher has had many years of teaching experience, was a U.S. Army Ranger, and was an EMT. Very nice and friendly individual who could be lenient. He also taught both algebra classes and AP Physics and an AP Calculus course. That kid only did 3 things: eat, smoked, and played video games. He's been arrested 3 times. Story 2. Little backwards, but when I taught a class of 5th grade hard knocks, literally reading extremely below level, and I was switched from my happy 2nd grade class to them mid-school years because their behavior was so out of control, I always told them to put their hands in their laps during carpet learning time, that if I stepped on their fingers when I walked through them, as I constantly did to engage in academic conversation with them, I wouldn't feel bad. They didn't give a crap about rules, much less a crap about me. Well, one day I was wearing heels. As I stepped through them and they sat on the carpet, I accidentally drove the stick of my heel into a kid's hand. I, not so silently, said, "Crap," and immediately asked the kid if he was okay. Some of the kids smiled, but no one said or screamed anything. From that day on, most of their behavior issues disappeared, and we got some extremely beneficial academics in. I think them knowing I was human too, and that I did care about them, changed everything. And to legit answer the question, when a sub was doing roll call in high school and she asked, "True Ho? Is True Ho here?" And the girl's name was Thu Ho. Edit, because people are asking about carpet learning time. I'm in the U.S. in elementary, my state at least. We do a majority of our main lesson with kids sitting on the floor. It gets them out of their desk and allows them to converse with their peers about what they're learning. Story 3. Had a cracker of an English teacher back in the day. She clearly considered herself a bit of a MILF, lots of fake tan and borderline inappropriate clothes. She was quite funny and brutally honest. I was going through my edgy teen years. We got along pretty well. She'd led a colorful life and liked to tell stories that weren't really for school hours, like how one time she went on a date with a guy who took her on a river booze cruise. She decided after a few drinks that her date was lame and left him to hook up with another guest on the boat, leaving him on his own. Forced to watch her sledding about. She decided after a few drinks that her date was lame and left him to hook up with another guest on the boat, leaving him on his own. Forced to watch her sleuthing about for hours until the boat docked again. The story that made me question exactly how much I liked her was some largely uneventful but similar anecdote that ended with her dumping the guy. He showed up at her work to beg her to take him back, making a big scene which annoyed her enough that she basically humiliated him on the spot. Which, to be honest, is fair enough. Never do this to someone at work. It's scummy behavior. But then she said it was the straw that broke the camel's back, so he jumped in front of a train. And then she laughed about that. She seemed to think it was funny that this guy unalived himself, at least partly because of her, and she expected us to laugh too. No one did. Needless to say, my estimation of her went way down. Think it hit rock bottom when I heard she apparently slept with a student at my prom a few years after. Wow, she just got worse and worse and worse. Story 4. I was 13, 7th grade. My homeroom teacher was Mr. Baker. I lived in a neighborhood a few blocks away from a park, and I was finally old enough to get to walk there myself. I was overweight, and I had started walking there almost every day. I would walk the track for hours and then walk back home. It was a positive for me and would have probably led to healthier choices down the line. One day, during free period, he called out my name. In front of my entire homeroom, kids I'd known my whole life plus a few new people, he told me that he had seen me walking down the road. Laughing now, he said that he had to wait 10 minutes for me to move out of the way because I was blocking half the road. Most of the class laughed with him. I had to sit there holding everything in until the bell rang. Then I went to the bathroom and sobbed. I never walked to the park again. I was afraid to leave my house for a really long time. That crap was so uncool and effed me up for a long time. People really suck for absolutely no reason. It's just a thing we have to accept, and I hate it. Story 5. I was a first-year high school teacher teaching a subject I loved, but I was honestly in over my head. The kids were pretty understanding about my inexperience, and I had a sarcastic, self-deprecating sense of humor that they seemed to enjoy. I borrowed a lab room one day. The pull-down screen in that room had a rope cord tied to the handle for raising and lowering it. As I finished explaining a new concept, I teach chemistry and we were using some tricky math that day, I set the kids to practice. I raised the screen and saw that someone in another period had tied the cord into a noose. And so I, the so-called responsible adult in the room of 17-year-olds, said, "And here's a noose for you, in case you want to unalive yourself after all that learning." Most of the kids laughed, but I was mortified and immediately apologized. Almost a decade later, I'm still friendly with some of the students who were in that period, and they won't let me live it down. One of them tells me that's the moment I became their favorite teacher. Thank God, no one reported me to the principal, but they would have been absolutely right to do so. Story 6. I'm not a native English speaker, however, we do have English lessons in my country since we're in elementary school. When I was in 3rd grade, I had this English teacher who told us French fries meant strawberries. Yes, I'm not making this up. Worst part is that there was an activity in our workbooks where we had to draw burgers with French fries. I thought, this is a bit weird, isn't it? Eating burgers with strawberries on the side. So I got home that day and I told my aunt, who also thought it was a weird combination, and searched French fries in the dictionary and of course found out the true meaning. The next class I walked to the teacher's desk and told him discreetly, I think you may have been mistaken. French fries means French fries and strawberries means strawberries. Well, he looked at me as if I had gone mad and told me, French fries is just another way to say strawberries. We're going to be learning a lot this episode. Story 7. I had a crazy religion teacher who said it is a sin for girls to wear pants instead of skirts or dresses. She was wearing pants all the time. I had a math teacher who said, math is not fun. You smile when you're having fun, so if you're smiling in my class, I know you're not doing math, and I will send you to the office. Math was my favorite subject. I got sent to the office a lot. I now teach math because I want to make sure kids get a better teacher than I did. Edit. Remembered another one from a different religious teacher. Whenever we had a paper and we asked how long it should be, his answer was, it should be like a woman's skirt, long enough to cover the topic, short enough to keep it interesting. Story 8. This happened 10 years ago, but I still remember it like it happened yesterday. We had a student teacher for the semester in world history. Everyone hated her. She began speaking on illegal aliens and how if you want to come to the USA, do it legally and you won't be ostracized. Okay. This guy stood up and told her off in the politest way. He politely let her know that his parents were those illegal aliens. He didn't appreciate her talking so badly about them and how he was a proud Mexican American. She tried justifying what she said by telling him that they had to have come over legally, so it was fine. He stood up and gave this long speech of how his parents snuck in through laying under gutted seats in a van, made a life for themselves and had children, got their citizenship and worked their butts off every day to continue living their version of the American dream. Then she gets upset and tells him something along the lines of, "It's people like your parents?" And then he got mad. He was still calm but began talking more sternly and gave her a lesson on being respectful of others, telling her she needed to realize how privileged she was to be a white woman and how he hopes she's improved herself one day when he's writing her checks. She sent him to the office for racism against her, so everyone from the class took his things to the office and explained that she was the issue, showed the receipts from videos, and we never saw her again. This kid was effing brilliant. He literally gave a girl the shirt off his back when hers ripped during gym just so she wouldn't have to wear one from the nurse. The kindest, most giving person I've ever known. I don't know where he is now, but I hope he's writing her checks. Story 9. Had a sub pop off about Jehovah's Witnesses. A full 5+ minute rant saying they were a cult and abused children. My best friend grew up in Jehovah's Witnesses, and he was sitting a few rows down. I piped up after she'd said something to the effect of locking them up and taking their children because of the way they recruit door to door, saying they trespass and abuse children. As a 16-year-old, all I could say was, "You can't be saying this to us." She stopped and we reported her to the principal, but nothing ever came of it. Worst part, she wasn't exactly wrong on some of her talking points based on some stuff my friend had confided in me. But you can't be saying that to a group of public school kids, especially when at least one of them is being raised in that religion. He already felt so isolated, having to leave the classroom for any type of party and getting yelled at by every new teacher for not standing for the pledge. Now he has to hear you call him a trespasser and child abuser? Come on now. Story 10. The previous night, a student from our university had been hit and killed by a stolen van whilst walking home from a night out. This was obviously all over the local news the next morning and was all the talk before class started. Our first lecture is with this incredibly narcissistic teacher who is meant to be teaching us engineering but won't shut up about classic literature and poetry. He likes to think of himself as a superior intellectual to anyone he has ever personally met and takes credit for all his previous students' successes, despite contributing very little. Anyway, class starts. He starts off on a rant about some Greek philosophical crap he'd read the night before. He can see no one is interested and would rather not be there or else just learn about engineering. What he says next, I think he said to get our attention or rub us the wrong way because we weren't bothered about his rant. He says, "Well, if that boy last night had chosen to sit in and read something of substance rather than go out and waste his time getting intoxicated, he wouldn't have been hit by that van." The gasp was so loud all the air could have been momentarily sucked out of the room. Story 11. 6th grade science teacher called my mom to let her know I was one day overdrawn on my lunch money and told her, "If you can't afford kids, you shouldn't have them." 2nd grade teacher refused to let me go to the bathroom no matter how much I begged. When things eventually happened, she encouraged the class to laugh at me for not being able to control myself. Kindergarten teacher would regularly go into violent screaming fits if we didn't color correctly. As in, you couldn't color in circles or change direction, you had to pick a side-to-side angle and stick with it. She hit me and a few other students on the back of the head for this. Told my mom about it. Teacher denied it. My mom figured I was lying until she caught the teacher hitting a disabled student on a field trip. Not really bad, but memorable. 7th grade teacher was explaining to us how reputation and media coverage have a lot to do with how we perceive celebrities. Bridge into teaching us about how which words you are going to affect how people absorb your sentence. She used the example, would you rather babysit your child, Chris Brown, or Taylor Swift? This was in 2011. Classmate says, "Chris Brown goes hard." My teacher responded with, "Yeah, he hits hard too." That's just off the top of my head, but I have tons of terrible teacher stories. Story 12. That's one of your friends, and they're gonna die. My driver's ed instructor 5 minutes into my first ever driving lesson after another car passed us on a double yellow line. Needless to say, 16-year-old me was neither calm nor relaxed that day or during any of my lessons after. I think my anxiety irritated him. Rather than recognize it and address it, he continued being as harsh and abrasive as possible. After the second time I came home in tears, my mother called him and tore him a new one. Apparently, he told her that I was just a spoiled princess. My mother was not one for mincing words. She told him in no uncertain terms that she had paid him for a driver's education course and not his opinion. She added that if I came home crying again, he was going to have to deal with her in person. My mom was 4'11", but she was fierce and mean like you wouldn't believe it. Some of you out there have tiny moms, so you know what I'm talking about. Dealing with her in person was a serious threat. After being on the phone with her for 5 minutes, who would want to face that in person? My mom actually had to completely reteach me how to drive. I couldn't drive without white-knuckling and breaking down. She knew that my anxiety would be more dangerous to me as a driver than anything else. My mom was frequently an emotionally abusive, controlling, belittling parent, but on occasion, she could be deeply perceptive about where my cracks were placed and to use humor and grit to paste them back together. Story 13. I went to an inner-city high school in the late 1980s, so there's tons of stuff I could talk about, but I had one teacher who taught English, who was possibly the worst person I ever met. While I wasn't really political and didn't pay much attention to politics back then, knowing what I know now, it's extremely obvious that she was a Reagan Republican. If she's still alive, she was in her 50s back then. She wouldn't just be on the Trump train, she would be the conductor who checked tickets and threw all the non-white people off without stopping the train. Well, there's a lot of mean and crazy things she would say. The thing that always stuck with me is how she would call anyone who acted up or talked out of turn a welfare baby. What made her so terrible is that she would go on these rants and tirades about class and race, right out of the 1980s GOP playbook, without actually using terms that involved race or class. She would use codes like welfare baby or ghetto kids. If it had the same connotation back then as it does today, I'm positive she'd have thrown the word thug around a lot too. She would also tell us that we were all destined to go on welfare and be a drain on society when we were finally kicked out of school. Since it's been over 30 years, I can't remember everything, but the welfare baby and future welfare mamas always stuck with me. To me, it was basically the same thing as if she used the N-word because everyone knew what the heck she meant. Half the class was black and probably half of them were on welfare. Goodness gracious, I effing hated her. And before anyone asks, if you think a group of poor kids in a ghetto city school complaining to the school administration would have done anything, congratulations on being under the age of 30. Back then, nobody would have thought to bother going to an adult about this because nobody gave a crap about kids back then, especially inner city kids at a crappy school. Story 14. In my 10th grade English literature class, my teacher was always talking about how men used to essay young boys in order to get laid without having more children. I was pretty sheltered from a religious family in the South with terrible sex ed and still a virgin, so I asked why the men didn't just pull out. She said to me in front of the whole class that pulling out was an ineffective method of birth control and that she hoped that wasn't the method I was using. This sparked rumors around the school that I was sleeping with someone unprotected and caused me to be called a slut to be bullied. I put on a bit of weight and people kept saying I was pregnant. I lost the weight over summer, which caused a rumor that I had an abortion. So then people bullied me for being a baby killer. It was awful. So she was a virgin, but everyone called her a slut, and then when that wasn't true, she was a baby killer? Dude, you just can't win in high school. That sucks. Story 15. As a sophomore in 10th grade, probably around 15 or 16 years old, our very elderly English teacher announced to the class that she'd had her first naughty dream the night before. She didn't go into details aside from saying it was very interesting and she'd never had one before. And the class kind of laughed and shrugged this off because she was a cool teacher. Looking back as an adult, I realized how inappropriate that was. Why on earth would she share the fact that she had an intimate dream with her underage high school class? Another time, my very white home ec teacher in the 8th grade literally yelled at the table of black kids who typically sat together to take your ghetto selves back to your ghetto houses. All they were doing was talking during an activity, and then the entire 8th grade started a petition to get her fired that made her cry and quit 6 months later. And then finally, when I was in the 9th grade, our art teacher would disappear in the back room with one of the held back older kids for special lessons for the entire class duration. All of us thought it was weird, but didn't really think much of it because we were kids and adults are in charge and know what they're doing. Oh, we're stupid as heck. Then he started getting expensive gifts from her, like a fancy watch and a phone, etc., because she was helping him out and he stayed at her house a lot. So, being young and stupid, I honestly thought she was adopting him and parenting him. How sweet was that? No, it was an affair. He was over 18, so she wasn't arrested, but still, that's crazy. Story 16. I had Chem 12 as my last class of the day. At the end of the class, we'd have to put our chairs on the tables. I sat at the end in the front with my friends. Me and Mr. Chow always loved to bicker back and forth and jest. It was funny. I don't know if I'd say I was the class clown, but I loved to goof around and make jokes and do pranks. Was also on the basketball team. You get the point as far as background goes. I go to put my chair up on the table and I'm talking to my friend, not paying attention as I'm doing this, and my chair hits the chair beside mine and it falls, and as it falls it hits the chair next to it, and so forth till all the chairs in my row fall off. I'm just standing there staring with this blank look on my face, and Mr. Chow looks at me and shakes his head. Darko, if I had a daughter and she wanted to marry you, I'd shoot you. Everyone laughs. I laugh, and I just saw Mr. Chow. Ouch, so harsh. Your daughter would be lucky, then I could call you Dad. He just told me I could go, and I didn't have to wait for the bell. Story 17. Oh man, I get to tell the tale of the racist media teacher I had in college. Our class was all white apart from one black Muslim boy. We were looking at an awful red-top tabloid newspaper, commonly found in the UK, which had run a story about a white British woman who met and later married a Muslim man and also converted to Islam herself. A few years later, this man ended up being an extremist who unalived himself in a self-unaliving attack. The way this paper presented this story used pictures of the woman before and after meeting this man and converting to Islam, taking particular note of her wearing of religious clothing. So, how did my teacher show this to the class? Well, she said, "Here's a picture of her before she met this man." Shows the picture. "And here's the woman after she converts to the dark side." Shows the after picture. The whole class was stunned into silence. I think she tried to make this a joke, but everyone realized what an awful thing she had just said was. The Muslim boy was livid. He didn't say anything, but you could just tell from his clenched fists. We got her fired. Thankfully, we never saw her again. Story 18. Our TA has to fill in for the professor on the very last day of one of my grad school classes, and the chapter for that day was Women's History. The thing about that class is the students would read the chapters and one student would present a given chapter every day. It had a lot of crossover with the history ed department, so it was done that way to give some experience with teaching. And then the professor would usually let us go after a quick round of questions. Well, on this day the TA decided for some forsaken reason to lecture us on women's history after the girl who presented the chapter had finished, instead of just letting us go. Problem is, the dude is kind of really sexist and was spouting a bunch of bullcrap about men's and women's roles and other nonsense. And then, with maybe 5-ish minutes left, this one girl in the class, who's also a Marine, just tore him a new one and called out his bullcrap. It kind of made the whole thing worth it because most of my grad school cohort couldn't stand the guy, so we still like to bring that one up and laugh at him. Story 19. I'm dyslexic, and a few teachers over the years have been irritated by that. I had a chem teacher that didn't believe in dyslexia. She thought it was an excuse to be lazy. So she picked on me in front of the class to the point where she would make me write things on the board in front of everyone. Her and everyone would call out what I did wrong, and when I got stuck, she wouldn't help me. I just had to stare at the board crying in front of everyone. The lunch bell went one time, and she said no one could go until I finished. I tried to say to her it's not their fault, but she wouldn't listen. Then it got 15 minutes into lunch, and she obviously figured she can't not let the kids eat, so she let them go, but not me. I tried to say I had plans to meet a friend at lunch, and it's not fair to leave said friend waiting and not getting to eat, and she was having none of it. So I blew my top, I shouted, I stormed out and slammed the door. I was scared of doing it, then something dawned on me, that if she tried to complain about me, the class knew what happened back to me, so she was in the wrong. A while after, it was parents' nights, and she tried to tell my mom that I was lazy and had a horrible attitude, and my mom said to her, I know my child, and she told me all about you. And I know she would only react with a bad attitude when aggravated, and don't worry, I will be complaining about you. The teacher's face dropped, and so did mine. My mom complained to the school, and the teacher left me alone. I had other teachers also refuse to help me. I asked another teacher for help a few times in one lesson and really wasn't getting it, and she wasn't really trying to come from a different angle, so I was still stuck. So I asked a fourth time, and on her way over to me, she muttered, "For F's sake." I was so hurt, and others in the class heard and asked if I was okay, which obviously I wasn't. Lastly, there was math. I struggle with mental math so bad I have dyslexia. My teacher would make us do a set of mental sums, and once done, we were all to put our hands up, and he would call out the numbers 0 through 10, starting at 10, and you would put your hand down at the number of questions you got right. Again, everyone's seen your failures, and at least 6 weeks running, I got a 0 out of 10, which he would shout at me for, and I never got more than 3 out of 10, but he never made any effort to address the fact I wasn't achieving. If you've made it this far in reading, thanks. This is a really painful subject for me, as I was bullied by adults about it. I hated myself for years, and I thought I was worthless because my ability was less. I'm now 22, and I've only just started to realize my worth and not to root so much self-esteem in my disabilities. I really love learning, and I'm glad now I have my own space to do so without being crammed into a box. During my lockdown, I started reading. I finished a book, which I haven't done since I was in high school, and since that one, I've read 3 more. I wish I could go back to my school teachers and tell them how much their poor care affected my life. As a teacher, you are molding kids' experiences, not only that can be positive, but doing it wrong can be detrimental. If you have any questions about dyslexia, feel free to ask. I'm an open book. Story 20. I don't feel like ranking, so here's a few in no particular order. Called a Hispanic student who moved from Texas, Tex-Mex, like a burrito with extra cheese, and said she couldn't really be Hispanic because she's an American. Told an entire English class of students they shouldn't go to college because the commie atheist will convert you and you won't be allowed to speak. After an LGBT and STEM org had mentioned a fun event they were holding on campus, said to his full physics lecture hall of students, "Enough from those attack helicopters, huh? Am I right?" We had read a fairly graphic book, which several students in class had requested alternate assignments for due to previous traumatic experiences with the content. Think essay and self-unaliving. She asked the discussion question, should students be forced to read about traumatic content they can't handle? After the class pretty unanimously agreed that it was royally messed up for her to do that, she had a meltdown and said it was the same as making her read about poverty. She's very solidly upper middle class. Same teacher as above made us watch a PETA documentary in class and told everyone, "Watch! They have a machine that used to break these baby chicks' necks. It's so cruel." The machine in question was used to vaccinate chicks from a lethal disease, so I waited till after class, so she wouldn't accuse me of undermining her in front of the class, to explain that to her. She then said she was joking, but proceeded to tell the other classes I tried to justify breaking baby chicks' necks. Same teacher as the last two assigned us a reading passage as homework. Walked into class, and someone asked me a question about it. I responded with my thoughts. She walked in, heard us talking about it, and yelled, "Who said that? I told you there's a pop quiz today." We both said nobody, we were just talking about the reading. She said if nobody confessed to being given quiz answers, she was reporting the whole class to the principal for cheating. Nobody did, because nobody had. She ran out in tears, and 15 minutes later came back in and only said, "The answer to number 5 is C," and handed out the quiz. I hope you'll enjoy reading them more than I ever did living them. Dude, some of these teachers are so silly. Story 21. I was in elementary school around grade 5. Might have been grade 6 since I had the same teacher for 2 years. What happened was we had a quiet girl in our class who was very artsy and happened to have pure white shoes. Well, she had her canvas and doodled all over these shoes. Our teacher was having none of it. She was normally yelling at us, but we royally upset her off on this day. So, when Artsy Girl decided to walk up to her and hand in the assignment we were working on, our teacher snapped. We were supposed to have gym class, then recess, and she proceeded to scream at us that she would find who did this to her shoes and to make them buy her new shoes. She said how we were going to use our gym and recess time to figure out who it was, even if it meant involving police and the principal. The worst part was that she really implied that these shoes were an eyesore. About 5 to 10 minutes after her rant, Artsy Girl speaks up. She was quiet, but all she said was, I did it. Our teacher proceeded to try and say that Artsy Girl did not color her own shoes, to which everyone else claimed that had not either. So our teacher let us go for recess early, and everyone became less terrified that the police and our principal was going to be bursting into our room. Story 22. When I was in middle school, there was a new history teacher that started the year with the usual presentation stuff. He gave us a piece of paper with questions like, "What's your name?" You answered on a paper, and then when collected, he proceeded to read them in front of the class so that everyone can learn things about you. One of the questions was, "Which sports do you practice?" To which I answered, "Home workouts," because I followed home workout videos and I did nothing else. When he read the answer, he asked who wrote it and what it meant precisely. I said I did and started by explaining that I don't practice any sports in a club or anything. And he immediately cut me off and said, "Well, we can all see that, am I right?" And everyone laughed. I wasn't particularly overweight or anything, maybe a little heavier than what is considered skinny, but that sure as heck had an impact on my confidence. Also had the audacity to act surprised when I glared at him for the rest of class. Hey, Mr. Bush, I still hate you. Story 23. I went to a private high school for kids with special circumstances. This could range from emotional issues to learning disabilities to having gotten caught dealing drugs. The owner of the school, she didn't like using the word principal for something of a narcissist, the kind that would think everything's flowers and sunshine as soon as she walks into a room. She thought she made things seem like a happy, wholesome family. Speaking of her family, her son was a teacher at the school. One weekend, I got a text from another student telling me to go to a certain news website. Well, lo and behold, a local teacher was arrested for possession of over 80 counts of CP. Hey, guess who it was? Her son, the photography teacher. I later found out that, thank God, none of the images involved any of the students. Still horrible, of course, but you know. Anyway, naturally, there had to be a school assembly to talk things through with the students. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect. How could someone with her personality possibly explain that her son, our teacher, was arrested for being a predator? Son's name made a mistake. We are not defined by our mistakes. You've all made mistakes, and that's why you're here. To be clear, some, like myself, just had emotional issues that made public school extremely unsuitable for us. Even the ones that did get caught doing something illegal weren't doing anything as bad as dealing with CP, and this female dog had the audacity to compare all of us to her dang predator son. Also, if it was, say, one instance of inappropriately texting a 17-year-old, it would still be gross, but I could kind of see a teenager lying and say they were 18 or whatever, less bad than it actually was. He was married, so it still would have been scummy, but over 80 freaking images? That's not a mistake, that's a twisted fixation. Story 24. I had one teacher in school who was the cool teacher. He swore, he joked, he got crap done. So, we loved him. But one day, my mate was giving the guy a bit of lip, nothing serious, and the teacher was even having a laugh with it. But it kind of went south. My mate went, paraphrasing here, "Dude, you're acting like a mom, telling us to do this and that." And the teacher replied, "I'm not your mother, but I would sure like to do her." Which sounds bad enough, but that was the humor of the class. He said that to us before, and we've said it back. The problem was that my mate lost his mother when he was 5 to cancer. However, he was a teenager by then, and so he came to terms with it and even made the odd joke about it. We all kind of froze, waiting for the response. Fortunately, he took it like a champ and said, "Well, you look a bit creepy, like an effing corpse." And the color just drained from the teacher's face as my mate and the rest of us began to get a bit of a chuckle on. The teacher reached into his wallet, handed over a tenner to my mate and said, "Please don't tell anyone while I'm working here." Story 25. Just so you understand the setting, this was 30 years ago, because I'm fairly sure that it had happened now, the teacher would have probably been immediately fired under ADA rules. I had a blind friend taking the same class as me. She had this machine sort of like a typewriter. It wasn't really any louder than a modern keyboard, and she sat in the back of the room as to not distract anyone because she had a phenomenal hearing. The teacher would loudly complain that her presence and the use of the machine was a distraction. but she would also not allow for any recording devices to be used. Since I would help my friend get around, we stayed after class, and I told her that it isn't fair to her that she'd be singled out like that, and I was planning to go to the dean about it. She lost her dang mind and started screaming about someone with her condition should be wasting everyone's time by furthering their education. I'm fairly sure that I called her a female dog after that, much to the department head's delight. She wasn't fired, but she didn't teach the class the rest of that quarter, and she was very surprised a few years later when I became a faculty member at the same school. Story 24. I am a special ed teacher and have co-taught with some winners. Highlights: math teacher getting upset that a student wouldn't shut up. Girl said something snappy. Teacher kicks off her shoes and says, "Female dog, let's go." I took the girl out of the room. 5th grade teacher reads from textbook, sighs and says, "I just don't remember this stuff. I guess I'll be learning it alongside you guys." I taught math that year. Science teacher would refuse to open the door if my kids, who were visually impaired, were late, but let everyone else in. She and I had some epic throwdowns, not in front of the kids. Social studies teacher has the kids push the desks back, announces we are all going to learn salsa dancing instead of the curriculum, proceeds to grab different girls and salsa dance with them. I very briefly taught in a place I call the Confederate Flag District because, well, lots of students had them. We are in Michigan, by the way. A student told one of the 3 black students he was only 3/5 of us anyway, and the math teacher laughed. I lost my crap, lost it, and I was not there much longer. Story 25. I've got 2, and they're both horrible. One was a tech ed teacher, the other a computer teacher. They were literally the same class, and they were both old white men. The tech ed teacher was teaching us some programming crap I don't remember, and a really good friend of mine dropped her pencil. And when she went to pick it up, he literally stopped talking mid-sentence, and you could clearly see him looking down her shirt. Another time we were sitting at a table with 4 people. Me, my 2 best friends, one of them the girl from before, and other my friend from way back that I'm still friends with to this day. And this other girl that I didn't know very well. Anyway, this girl was talking to the girl I was friends with about her efforts to impress her crush. I wasn't really listening because me and my other friend were playing add-on, but they told me about it later. Apparently, she said, "I don't know what to do to get him to notice me." The teacher came over, revealed that he had been eavesdropping, and then said, "I could give you some pointers." A week later, he got arrested for trying to grope an 8th grader. The other teacher was one of my favorite teachers until he revealed himself to be similar to the tech ed teacher. He was always really nice and funny, but then things changed. He called a girl up to use as a model to teach us something else I don't remember, and as she walked over, he spanked her. The girl freaked out, but the teacher just laughed, grabbed a ruler, and spanked her with it. She grabbed the ruler, snapped it in half, and stormed out of the classroom, flipping him off as she left. He started following her, but about 15 different kids all got up to stop him. The girl told the principal, and he got fired. But apparently he got his job back in my sophomore year. My middle school was effed up, to say the least. Story 26. My son's teacher, but I witnessed it. I walked into the school for a class activity. I was walking past the PE room and overheard the PE teacher yelling. She said, "What are you doing? Don't you have any brains?" I walked into the office and said, "What is going on? Who speaks to kids like that? Is this what happens when parents aren't here?" The office lady says, "I don't know, go see." Keep in mind the gym is right across from the office. It must be a normal day in the school for the office lady to have zero reaction. I walk in the gym to find my son's kindergarten class in there. I confronted the assistant principal and it goes on, "It depends on the context." I told her that I clearly heard it and that if the teacher cannot emotionally control herself, what is she doing with kinder kids? I asked my son, narrowed down the child it was said to, and contacted the mother as I knew it wouldn't be looked into. The mother contacted the school board. Wouldn't you know it, the PE teacher had more issues than that. Story 27. Had a professor of data structures, a computer science course. While demonstrating an algorithm on a huge whiteboard, a student asked a question. His response cost him his job. "Have you not read the book? An idiot can do this. My aides will show you after class. Next question." This was a class with 80 people at a University of California campus, with several people that collectively had a spectrum of disabilities attending. For starters, several of them record the entire class. Unfortunately, several of them have taken abuse their entire lives because of their conditions, and they weren't paying $15K a year to hear that BS. After the class, a large group of students, myself included, reported the professor to the dean of that particular college. 2 days later, we were required to have a student judicial review, like a fake court where students and faculty can be held accountable. 500 students showed up to testify against the professor. He was not liked at all, and his abuse was widespread. He was fired the next day, lost his tenure, lost his grad program, every student that was enrolled in the class was allowed to continue under a new professor, and if not satisfied with the final grade, allowed to retake without penalty. Story 28. I was 16, in first hour chemistry, working on a lab with my partners, minding my own business, when one of the teachers in my class, it was a co-taught class since I have a learning disability, I was put into it for that specific reason. He walks up to me and says, "You look really nice today, but I kind of wish you were wearing a little bit more pants," in front of the entire class while it was dead silent. The outfit in question was a black pair of leggings and a cheetah print blouse that went down to my thighs, just above my knees. I was not breaking any dress code violations, mind you, but I am thicker and curvy. I was the only Hispanic girl in the class, most of which made up of other boys and the occasional white girl. My other teacher looked absolutely petrified, because he was probably afraid that I'd clock the absolute crap out of Mr. Judd. I ended up angrily packing up my stuff, sauntering out of the room, and slamming the door. I walked to my next class early, which started about 10 minutes later, and just sat down like he belonged there and cried. My English teacher, that was the class I had next, looked up from grading our papers and said, "You look very nice today." I cried more. Mr. Judd had taken roughly 5 minutes to use a computer to find out what my schedule was, to find out where to look for me. Found me sitting at the desk in my other teacher's classroom. My English teacher refused to even let him in the room. He was older, around 70 at the time, and didn't take crap from anyone, kid or adult. And no one liked him, honestly. So I looked up and said very calmly, "It's all right, we can talk outside." He reminded me he wasn't going to make me talk to Judd if I didn't want to, but I walked out there, looked him in the eye, and just said, "There is a time and a place for those conversations, and that was not the time or the place." He apologized, and I turned my back on him and shut the door. He stood out there for a few minutes before he realized I wasn't interested in hearing anything else he had to say. To this day, when I've seen him outside of that class since, we all live around the same area, he won't even meet my eyes. Story 29. There's a kid in my class who was always an a-hole and tried to be a class clown. We disagree with a lot politically, so I tend to avoid talking with him, but he finds ways to irritate people because he finds it funny. Anyways, his entire family are pro-life, heavily against both abortion and condoms or anything that can prevent pregnancy. His mother, believing this, has around 12 kids. I'm not trying to shame his mother for her life. I mean, do what you want, but I will shame her for the fact that I've heard her complain time and time again about how they struggle with money, yet since then they've had 3 more kids. Our art teacher, when he found out about this, joked and said, "Oh, well, your mommy gets around, doesn't she?" It was both the best and the worst. The worst because he almost got suspended. The best because it felt so effing good to see the kid's face when he heard that. Story 30. I have 2 entries. One was during a theology class. I went to a Catholic high school, and we were talking about Abraham and how God instructed Abraham to start the practice of circumcision or whatever. One of the girls asks about circumcision and how she never saw one that wasn't, and then started asking the teachers all kinds of weird questions about foreskin and chickens. Instead of, shutting the conversation down or directing her to the health teacher, the teacher decides to demonstrate how a foreskin works with her hands. This sparked additional questions from the classes, at which point the teacher mentioned that her husband wasn't circumcised. That was very awkward. Well, at least the questions stopped. The other story involves an elementary school teacher. The school I was attending was having budget issues and had to lay off some faculty. One of them was my 5th grade teacher. For whatever reason, they thought it was a good idea to inform the staff of their status in a Monday morning meeting in March. The teacher was obviously upset. She made it halfway through the day before she launched into a tirade while disciplining a student for talking during a test. She basically used the F word a bunch of times, said that she no longer gave a crap about teaching, and that she hoped the principal and pastor of the school would burn in heck. Story 31. A chronically disruptive kid was talking loudly in the front row and derailing the teachers, thought and just generally making it impossible to ignore him for the 1000th time that year, sophomore in high school. And the teacher, who was also a football coach, spat his gum out in the kid's face and continued talking like nothing had happened. It literally bounced off his cheek and flopped down onto his desk. Everyone was in complete stunning awe at what had just happened. And the kid shut the heck up and had a pretty permanent reduction in being disruptive douche, in that class at least, for the rest of the year. It was amazing. I wish I could go back and relive that moment. It was simultaneously one of the funniest things I've ever seen and completely terrifying. Everyone, including the kid, laughed about it afterwards, but at the time we were just too shocked to even react. Also, my freshman year, a different teacher got fed up with the kid and grabbed his desk and shook it while yelling at him. We also at one point convinced our English teacher that we didn't know what a bong is, and she drew a diagram on the chalkboard. Good times. Story 32. During college, a group of us had a study abroad experience in China. As part of it, my group was taught by a different professor from the nearby university. Most of the time it was very scripted because the professors weren't fluent in English. However, we had one awesome professor who gave English a go in a more casual fashion. He was teaching us about the history of China, and while describing the shape of China, proceeded to say, China is like a fat chicken. He was referring to a rooster. For a group of 18 to 19-year-olds trying to be respectful and understanding this was clearly a translation snafu, we all choked back our laughter and tried to keep straight faces. However, this professor proceeded to say it probably another 5 times, and the class was quickly dissolving in laughter. One of our classmates knew quite a bit of Mandarin and explained the situation politely to the professor while we were giggling. He was such a good sport about it too. Story 33. I wasn't in the class, but we were right across the hallway from them. But a teacher said the N-word. I can't remember if he called a student that or why he said it, but the point was, it was racist. Now, it just so happened that this class was predominantly made up of people of color. And as you can imagine, this did not sit well with them at all. A lot of the reactions and comments made could definitely be heard in our classroom. Not exactly comments you'd expect to hear from a teacher who was supposed to be one of the more important teachers at the school. He eventually tried to justify what he said by saying something along the lines of, well, you boys say words like spastic and loser a lot. My mother worked with the mentally challenged, so words like that are more personal to me, like how the N-word is more personal for you. In fact, I believe spastic and idiot to be worse. The whole class got up and left early. I don't know if he was forced to leave or choose himself because he left at the end of the year and somehow managed to find himself a job as a head teacher. I think he had to be kept around because his role was too important to fill quickly and he had GCSE classes to teach. We all thought he was a bit of a tosspot anyway, so those who stayed on there for A-levels got quite lucky. Story 34. I had a piece of crap summer school chem teacher going into 11th grade who was just a monster for no reason. My grandpa passed away a couple of weeks into school, so I had missed some class and maybe 2 assignments. When I came back, he asked me where my work was in front of the whole class. He made me stand up and answer. I uncomfortably answered, I'm sorry, Mr. Can't remember F-Head's name, but I haven't had a chance to complete them since my grandpa passed away a few days ago. He rolls his eyes and says sarcastically, well, it sure seems like a lot of people's grandpas are dying this summer. The whole class went silent. I was so mad and hurt I started crying immediately, and a boy stood up and said, That's really rude of you. She just lost her grandfather. He proceeded to tell me my tears weren't going to work, and the assignments were due the next day. I went home that day and told my dad everything. Obviously, he was infuriated and disgusted. The next day, he took me to the principal's office, let him have it, then had him call the teacher, and boy, I've never seen someone look so scared in their life. I remember my dad saying, So are you calling me losing my father an effing lie? I just lost my father and now I have to deal with your stupid butt? My dad is a 6'2" El Salvadorian man with hands so big it's not even funny, so when he's mad, he looks mad. My dad proceeded to tell him to shut the F up when he tried to answer and then explained to him if he ever messed with me again, he would break his legs. Needless to say, I was treated like royalty after that. I frickin' love you, Dad. Story 35. We had a substitute teacher once who just refused to listen to the students. I understand a little bit why. I mean, if you always do that to kids, it can be vicious and try to get away with stuff, but there is a time where you need to check yourself. We had an autistic kid in our class. Fairly sure it was autism at least. Never had his condition actually labeled to me though. He was just a classmate to me. He did his own work, but the school kept him in our grade because he grew up with us. He was in my kindergarten class. Honestly, this was just normal to all of us. We didn't really think twice. Well, anyways, this substitute apparently wasn't told this and tried to call on him to read out of the high school history book. And we can see him get uncomfortable, and she just keeps getting more mad and telling him to read. One of my classmates steps in and says, he doesn't read out loud, and the sub sends her straight to the principal's office saying, of course he can read. You weren't getting away with that. No discussion, nothing. So she leaves in a huff and gets punished by the school. After she's gone, we all want to speak up, but there's obviously no arguing with this lady. She's just crazy. She listens to the poor student struggle over the first 5 words, and oh my gosh, the look on her face as she realized she was wrong and what was going on. But her stupid pride wouldn't admit that. She called the next student and never told the principal to rescind the punishment, so the student still got in trouble for telling her the truth. Story 36. In my freshman Spanish class, our teacher was just out of college, and we were her first class. She started with such a happy spirit, but was broken almost immediately. She was like Hilary Swank's character in Freedom Writers if she never overcame it. Also, about 70% of the class was black. I promise it's important to the story. One day, people are carrying on, being disruptive like we always were. The teacher had had enough and yelled at us to get back in our seats and stop yelling, which was pretty typical. But she ended her typical rant with, "When you act like this, it shows how black your soul is." She put a lot of emphasis on that word black. All of the black guys in the class's jaws dropped for a really long second. Then they all started laughing really hard. Through laughter, they accused her of being racist, and she looked really embarrassed as she tried to defend herself. I didn't mean it like that. If you took it that way, that's not my fault." She did not gain back control of the class that day. Story 37. I live in a predominantly white city, and when I was in high school, the history class had a black guy. There were only like 3 in the entire school of 1,400 plus students. The history teacher was definitely a racist, and even though he said his statements were just jokes, and anytime something happened regarding a country in Africa or the Middle East, he would ask the black guy what he thought of it, even though the guy had lived in our country his whole life. Or whenever the teacher got annoyed with racial sensitivity, aka being called out for being a racist, he'd make some awful remark. The sentence that ended it was when he said that teacher said the guy was too sensitive just because he was dipped in the ink pot. This led to him nearly being fired and having to go through lots of racial sensitivity training. More people stepped forward and said that in class he often did the Nazi salute as a joke, but he definitely made a lot of offensive remarks. A coach of the same high school said that the girls looked nice in their jogging boy shorts and complimented how they looked. Ended up being accused and found guilty of multiple cases of SA. He was fired. Story 38. 10th grade advanced placement English 2. Teacher, first day of school. In my class, not a single male student will ever receive a higher grade than a female student. Girls are academically superior to boys, with girls making up 98% of all high school valedictorians. Continued with her rant about her parents loved and idolized her idiot, incompetent, and quite frankly, idiot brother because he was good at sports and how they never cared about her even with her perfect grades and scholarships. Then throw in more statistics about how girls are better than boys in every conceivable way except for physical prowess, and how said physical prowess is actually a drawback in modern society. Would force every student to shake her hand before entering her class, with her sanitizing between every handshake, and then mark you late because of her little ritual caused a line of 20 students ahead of them, letting them in and take their seats as they get to the door. Would force students to put all their phones, tablets, laptops, and smartwatches in a single, totally not big enough Tupperware container at the beginning of class. Despite our campus being a tech campus, they required all students to have a smartphone. It's the only reason my parents bought me a smartphone. And an iPad, Android tablet, or MacBook or Windows laptop wasted another 5 minutes of everyone's time. Would begin every class with a 15 to 20 minute woe is me rant and brag about her husband being the pastor of the local mega church and how she has daughters, but no sons. Had everyone take a very biased grammar test that she found on the internet that would tell you what your entire academic skill level is and what you will end up as in the future. With most of the advanced placement, i.e. college level class, which counted as dual credit if you paid for it, boys, besides myself, there was about 6 boys in total in the class of 30, somehow ending up somewhere between garbage man and cashier, while about half the girls ended up as school teachers, professors, writers, editors, and other things having an associate's degree in English might qualify you for. She also had an entire 4x12 chalkboard written in very tight, dang near impossible to read cursive. I can somewhat read cursive, but it has not been a required class in over 30 years, and quite a few schools either don't touch it at all or have a single unit out on the middle school, filled with vague rules. She would charge you $0.25 or $1 for every one you break, or she would force you to stay behind after class until the next bell rings, guaranteeing you to be late to your next class, or she would force you to sit in her room for 30 minutes after school ends in an unofficial detention, making you miss the bus. Luckily, this little bit was her undoing. She upset me off to the point I started bringing my old BlackBerry to school, and I just kept it in my backpack and recorded her rants and took a picture of her board when she was still outside the class shaking all the hands, made a flash drive with the highlights of her rants and the picture of her board and gave them to my aunt, who happened to be the head counselor of the school, who basically was under only the principal and basically the rank of the VP. Apparently it is illegal to charge students fines for breaking classroom rules. Her board was erased. She stopped with her rituals, and she took a pay cut and was informed her contract would not be renewed. Not terribly sure how everything turned out after that, as I moved out of the state not long after. Story 39. This was in 2001, and I got a hold of a memo recorder with a 2x playback, higher pitch, which was funny as heck. Plus, it had a microphone with a cord, which made it easy to conceal it in my pockets. Was doing some shenanigans trying to catch freakouts or funny stuff a teacher would say. We would listen to them during breaks on 2x and laugh about it. Got so used to it that I would press the record button automatically when some interesting stuff was happening in class. So at one point, our physics teacher just totally lost it. He was so upset for no reason at all at one of the students a few rows down. "You idiot! You effing idiot! You miserable, cancerous little crap! You arrogant effing!" He was spitting at this point. "I hope you effing die! Now get the F out of my classroom!" The student stood up and looked at me. "I so hope you got that, man." Yep, in fact I did, and handed the device over to him while he went to the principal. In the end, he got no punishment due to the tape, and the teacher had some private, heavy stuff going on. But I did, as my taping was frowned upon, and several teachers gave me stink eye for a while. Story 40. So last year we had a test for Latin class. Nothing special, the teacher had already announced it 2 weeks before. There was this classmate, and she wasn't that great in Latin, and to be honest, it's not like she did anything for it. But that test, since it was just vocabulary, I believe she had actually studied for it, since it would be easier for her to get a good mark. So she did the test, and then for some reason she rolled her test into a cylinder, opened her water bottle, and put her test in it as some sort of message in a bottle. The teacher decided to be funny and started singing Dutch songs. "All the ducks are swimming in the water," rough translation, which technically isn't that much of a big deal, but it is when you realize the word for ducks is the same as the word for one, the lowest mark we use in the 1 to 10 systems, with 1 being the lowest and 10 the highest. So he was basically saying, "All the ones are swimming in the water," which was a huge sign he didn't believe in her at all, even though she had studied for the test. He wasn't the best teacher, but I'm happy he wasn't my teacher anymore. But surprisingly, he didn't get fired because of being a bad teacher, but because his contract had ended, and we have this rules in the Netherlands which stated he couldn't get a new contract at our school. He still walks around at our school, now as a guy for the computers and that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, he is a teacher again, because one of the teachers can't teach for a while. And of course, she got him again. She isn't my classmate anymore. Had to redo the year. I believe they are okay with each other now. Story 42. When I was in 6th grade, my school forced us to take typing classes. We had a kid in our class whose parents were rightly convinced that computers were more than just a fad and would be extremely commonplace in the very near future. So from like age 4, his parents made him take typing lessons. By 6th grade, he could type over 60 words per minute. This made it so the simple typing instructions we got as 6th graders took him like 15 minutes of the hour we had. One day, our usual teacher, who was aware of all this, was out and we had a sub. He finished his work quickly, as always, and started playing on a flash game site. The sub saw this and demanded to know why he was playing games instead of working. He showed her his assignment was done, and she huffed that he still needed permission to play games. He asked if he could play, and she refused, so he pulled out some homework and started on that. She got even more annoyed at him and demanded that he sit still at his desk and stop bothering the rest of the class. She was the only one bothering the classroom, and at this point she had the attention of the entire class. She started asking the kids around him if he was bothering them, and when all of them said no, she looked around and realizing that everyone was watching her, completely spazzed and started screaming. "Just shut up! Shut the F up, you little a-holes! You think you're so clever, but you're not! You're nothing but a bunch of pathetically worthless effing idiots! I have never seen such a massive collection of disappointments in my life. You little female dogs think you can pull one over on me? Huh? You pitiful little effers are such a bunch of nobodies who will never get anything over on me, and I can't wait until the hereafter when I can see you old gosh dang idiots burn in hell for all of eternity." In the middle of cursing out a bunch of 12-year-olds, she started breaking down, sobbing that alternated occasionally to hysterical laughter and then back to sobbing throughout the rest of her whatever that was. Some of the kids closer to the door snuck out and grabbed some teachers' aides who were walking by. The aide came in and told us all to file out and head straight to the office. So we did, as she picked up the phone and called down to let them know we'd be coming and that she needed some help. As we walked to the office, we passed a couple of the other male teachers heading back to our classroom. The principal and the superintendent questioned us one at a time for the next little while about what she said, what set her off, had she physically assaulted anyone, what exactly happened, etc. As we stood in line at the office, she was dragged out of the school and handed off to a couple of waiting police officers. The whole time she was yelling, "I'll show you. I know your names. I know your faces," at the teachers and police and those of us still in the office awaiting questioning. Later that day, we found out that she had yanked a leg off one of the desks and used it to start smashing monitors after we left. The computer lab was closed for a week. It was by far the most bizarre and scariest thing I've ever witnessed. And to this very day, I'm absolutely convinced that what we witnessed that day was someone's consciousness dissolving into absolute insanity. Story 43. When I was a freshman, there was a girl in my math class who was pregnant, maybe in her late second trimester. She was planning on giving the baby up for adoption to a certain family and asked me what it was like being adopted, specifically in an open adoption. I don't remember how she found that out since we weren't really friends, but it's not like I kept it a secret either, so I wasn't bothered. We were having this conversation during some kind of downtime in class, and I was speaking very highly of my personal experience, but qualifying it with being, of course, different for everybody. Our teacher decided to jump in and tell us, the 13-year-old adoptee and 16-year-old mom-to-be, that she'd choose for her baby to die before giving it up for adoption. I know it's not even close to the worst thing a teacher could do or say to a student, but in that moment, all I heard was that my birth mom should have killed me, and all I could do was sit there awkwardly as she tries to backpedal without actually retracting her opinion or even remotely apologizing. 12 years later, I'm still daydreaming about how far I could and should have escalated that. Story 44. I went to a class for special needs kids. I never really fit in there due to the teachers and constantly fought with my teacher to be allowed to read whatever books I want rather than the small green children books. So one day we were getting a lesson about IQ and job opportunities for us. Nope, my mom was a mechanic and my teacher knew that. Teacher: my husband has an IQ of 200, which is why he's a doctor. You in here would never be able to achieve that. If you're lucky with your low IQ, you could become a mechanic. Only intelligent people such as me and my husband can become something. I wasn't really having that crap, so I replied, "If you're so intelligent, how come you're working with the special needs kids instead of normal kids? You're not even good at simmering down info for it to be digestible for an idiot like me. So what hope do you have teaching normal kids?" I got locked in the classroom for like 20 minutes, but it was worth it. Story 45. One of our high school gym teachers was a known alcoholic. For some strange reason, he was also our driver's ed instructor. Our town integrated that into the school. Part of the graduation requirement was a driver's license or medical exemption. One day in the simulator room, in the middle of our test, he stood up, held up his flask and toast and said, "Always know your limit. Mine's 2 flasks. This is my 3rd, and crumpled to the floor. The principal completed the rest of our semester of driver's ed. Somehow, he remained the freshman gym teacher though. Simulator room. Does anyone else remember these? It was a projection screen and then 10 to 15 cars. It wasn't like a video game, it was static, filmed footage. What you had to do was time your braking, turn signals, turning, and accelerating to what was happening on the screen. Then when you were done, the teacher would get a report of how many moves were missed for each person, and if they would have caused any accidents. Story 46. I'm a 38-year-old female, so I should clarify this was back in 1990, and he wouldn't get away with this behavior nowadays. Another time we were doing group math class, and he was calling on each of us individually to answer the mathematics question. I got the answer wrong. Instead of explaining why it was wrong, he stood in front of the whole class and told them all that I in particular was hopeless and would never be good at it, and I never got any of the answers correct. I got constant bullying for the next 2 years for this until I moved to senior school. Joke's on him. I took my GCSE in maths a year early with a grade C, self-taught myself GCSE statistics in just 6 months and passed with a B grade, completed an accountancy GCSE with a grade C a few years later at night school, have level 4 MAAT status, undergraduate level accountancy qualification, and am currently in my 2nd year of my BSc honorary accounting and finance. My mom worked there as a lunchtime supervisor and took great delight in telling that idiot how I was excelling in mathematics at senior school and took pleasure in saying that teachers were excellent, i.e. it wasn't my daughter, it was you were a loser. Story 47. This is all one class in 1 quarter with one professor. Spent the first hour of the first day of class telling us how he hated his job, that the time slot for this section sucked. Told us on that orientation day, "Don't give me negative feedback," and "I've done everything for you," and It's up for you to learn this. A student goes to the bathroom when the door to the classroom closes. The professor tells the class, "That guy's weird. He's a weirdo, and I worry about him. I think he might not make it. He's a Hong Konger." During lecture, he distracts himself and goes on a 7-minute rant, I timed it, about Japanese actions in the Pacific Rim in World War I and World War II, war atrocities, invasions, comfort women, revisions history. The rant ends with, "I hope nobody in this class is Japanese. I have big stupid dog. He has such a stupid face. When I see a stupid face, I just smack him right in the face." He gets frustrated when students don't respond to verbal answer prompts, tells us so. Then when someone offers, "I think it might be 23 kilometers, he goes off laughing. No, how could it possibly be 23 kilometers? That's 2 orders of magnitudes too high. It might be 23 meters, but I think the answer is closer to 2.3 meters. How did you possibly get 23 kilometers? That's not even close. You did it wrong, you stupid idiot." Procedural answers got ridiculed too. Why do you think it's that way? If you don't believe it, then I have to wonder if you understand the material at all. Got distracted by nuclear threat, went on a 3.5-minute rant about how it's best to die in the initial blast. Pop, just wiped off the earth. No time to think? You'll be fine. You don't want to be sick and struggle for food and shelter and water for days or months until you die. You want to go first. And you want to go the right way. Coming in, we'd write homework problem numbers on the board. He'd use that to list and review answer questions. A student drew a 9 since he wanted to help with the problem. Number 9. He was ridiculed. "Is that a 9 or a G? Why do you write like that? All in front of the class." When handing back tests, mocked a student in front of the rest of the class. "Nobody understands your work, just so you know. The way you do your problems, it's weird." Told us that he only looks at answers, despite giving partial credit. If you do work a weird way, he won't read it. He says he looks only at your answers. I don't have the patience to read everything else you wrote. He said that people who decide not to have children, they're doing it wrong. During a lecture, a student asked a question. The answer was, "This is just common sense. Why don't you get it?" Story 48. Finally, a question I have an answer to. I took an indigenous nations course, of which the teacher was a Brazilian man, around the age of 50 or 60, with long white hair and a white goatee. Right from the beginning of class, he stated that he despised us all because we were white. When people had an obvious look of disgust on their faces, he said, "Let me explain." And that was his introduction into the history of white Europeans taking over America. When a girl left the class in the middle of the lecture one day, he immediately says, "Excuse me, miss? Oh, look, everyone, someone can't handle the reality of what they did. Looks like you're all getting 2 points extra credit and she won't be." And he yelled after her even after she had already left the room. Later in the semester, I had to ask him a question about a project deadline. There was another person who approached after me, and the professor told me he will answer the other guy's question first because I believe I am white. The guy behind me was Mexican. Hated that guy. Everyone did, even the people who weren't white. I still got an A, but it was because he never looked at the homework we'd turn in. As long as the first page had writing on it, he wouldn't bother turning the page, which we all used to our advantage. Story 49. There was a girl with shorter hair in our economics class, and a substitute teacher was doing roll call and said her name. The girl answered saying, "Here," but then was promptly told by the teacher, "No, I'm looking for the boy in this picture." The whole class froze, and nobody could believe their ears. The whole class protested that he was wrong, and he still defended himself. To make matters worse, he went up to all the boys in the class and asked, "You have to think that this picture is a boy. I mean, look at that," in front of the girl continuously. Finally, after 30 minutes, he went up to her and said, "I'm sorry. Look, I'm sorry for calling you a boy, but you really looked like a boy in that picture. I mean, come on, I call it how I see it." Needless to say, there were complaints, and he lost his privilege to sub for teachers at my school. Story 50. I was 8 years old, and I had the same teacher for a year before that. She was a bully to the students and nice to the parents. Most of the girls in my class were scared of her. Anyway, I had learned that I was becoming deaf in both ears and needed hearing aids. I was getting bullied a lot in that class already, and I started to cry because I knew those girls would use it as another thing to pick on. So, after my mother went and I was walking to class with my teacher, I asked her could she please not tell the class that I just wanted to get back to normal in class and not be treated differently, as it was really stressful. She smiled and said, "Of course I won't tell anyone if you don't want to." I felt so much better then. We walked into the classroom, and the first thing she did was pull me to the top of the class and get everyone's attention, and I looked at her with tears in my eyes and whispered, "You said you wouldn't." She smiled and said, "You need to toughen up. and proceeded to tell the whole class and even show them my hearing aids. I was miserable. Of course, the bullying got worse. My mother did everything she could to get through to my principal for what my teacher did that was wrong, but my principal thought it was a good lesson for me. The whole, it shouldn't matter what people think bullcrap. They weren't the ones getting beaten up every day in the schoolyard. Story 51. One of my college professors, after a review for a midterm, started talking about the academic dishonesty policy in his class. He started going on about how he caught a cheating ring in one of his classes and got all of the international students involved deported. He made no mention of what happened to the other students if they just failed the course or were expelled from the university. He just talked about how the 10 or so international students in his class were part of a much bigger cheating ring at the university, and how in total there were about 50 students total that he got expelled, and then subsequently they lost their visas and were deported. It's not so much about what he did. Cheating is wrong. But he went on about it for 10 to 15 minutes and seemed almost proud of it, like it was the highlight of his career. It was a bit uncomfortable to listen to. I can't imagine how it would have felt for the international students in the class. Story 52. I had a music teacher in junior and senior high who once said in front of the class that someone specific wasn't the brightest bulb in the box. That kid suffered from a terrible home life and was on the autism spectrum. She also jokingly made several comments about how she feels bad for fat kids because they get treated poorly by other students unlike her. She gained weight and is obese now as an adult. She was a cheerleader in high school and apparently quite popular and got away with a ton of shenanigans and never intended on going to school for teaching in the first place. As if it wasn't obvious by how she treated her students, she even went so far as to show us her senior pictures from when she was in high school, just for fun. She also talked about her dating life, once after a terrible blind date and had the worst orange spray tan every spring. I can say now from experience as a music education student in university that while most music ed students choose education over performance because they truly love kids and want to teach, there's always one or two who come in as performance majors but quickly change education because their raw talent and overall musicianship isn't up to snuff for performance. There are also those who choose education when they intend to pursue performance after school because the teaching degree offers a backup plan, even though they don't like kids. My guess is my teacher was one of those kinds of students given her massive ego. Story 53. So I had a substitute teacher once for my English class in my junior year. He had gotten along really well with my older brother when he was in high school, and that trickled down into having friendly chat about my brother whenever the sub ended up in one of my classes. Well, one day right as class was ending, the sub asked me if I wanted to reach tomorrow's lesson. I thought it was a joke, so I said sure. It was not a joke. He gave me the lesson plan and read a book the entire time. I had to lead my fellow classmates through Plato's Layers of Hell. Another one was back in 8th grade. My teacher was getting us to learn about the government. We had to copy the URL for a website into the search bar from the slip of paper she handed out. But whenever I did it, it would be blocked by the school's firewall. She came over and leaned over to look at the screen and quickly backspaced and retyped the links, and the website popped up. And that's the story of how my dyslexia led me to look up adult content on the school's Wi-Fi instead of some government page. Story 54. I had a high school English teacher who used to hate the girls who made up the popular crowd. She called them future druggies. We thought it was funny at the time, but looking back, it's extremely inappropriate, even if it did turn out to be true for some of them. Honorable mention, my brother's 4th grade 9 to 10-year-old kids told the entire class that Santa wasn't real, and it was time they all grew up. Come to find out, it was retaliation against the parents for reporting her to the school board for not doing her job very well. She quit mid-school year because of the backlash. Edit. Can't believe I forgot to add this. We had an extremely overweight teacher my senior year that had the students sit at large round tables instead of the desks. He would sit in his big computer chair at the one in the front of the room so he wouldn't have to stand, with whichever kids got stuck there with him for coming in late. One day I got a text from a friend who was sitting at a table next to mine near the back of the room to look under the front table. The teacher had apparently ripped his pants, and I was met with an enormous pair of balls just chilling there on the computer chair. He had no idea, was proceeding with his lecture and getting increasingly annoyed that we were all giggling and not listening. Word got around the school and another teacher reported it to the principal. There was a huge meeting and he was suspended for a few weeks and moved to permanently supervising study halls rather than teaching. Then our class was reprimanded for not coming to him, the principal, and immediately telling him the situation. I'll never forget the shock when I realized what I was actually seeing under the table. Story 55. First day in college class, teacher's giving me a speech about don't give me an excuse why you're late or absent, just say when you'll be in. Her reason being the excuses are always lies. She proceeds to say a person in a different class held the day before had emailed her to say that their car was frosted over and they couldn't get to school. But teacher is smart. She Googled the dew points and it couldn't have been cold enough, so the student was clearly lying. But here's the thing. She never met this student because she wasn't in the class the day before. So the teacher didn't realize the girl was in this class too and just got accused of lying after having her personal conversation shared. She starts crying. Several other students back up that they had heavy frost too in shadier areas. Teacher tried to just move along with sorry, we'll talk about it later. Don't cry, we'll talk about it later. But I disliked her from that point forward and she didn't improve much throughout the year. Story 56. I don't know about worst, but my geography teacher couldn't handle the class, which was of mixed year groups year 9 to 11, and I was year 11 at all, and I didn't know her stuff. So one day she tries to teach the class that the reason why there was fog in the Amazon rainforest was because it was really sunny, and so the trees photosynthesize a lot, and so it makes the water vapor. For those of you who don't know, photosynthesis takes in water, doesn't make it. So I raised my hand and told her, Miss, do you mean that the trees respite a lot, which produces the water vapor? Instead of admitting that she was wrong or slipped up, she said, how dare you correct me? You're just seeking attention. She then nearly sent me out of the class and gave me consequence points, and if I recall correctly, a detention as well. That was quite a shock, as I don't misbehave in lessons and always give my best. This wasn't just a one-off. Several repeats occurred, but I didn't make the mistake of correcting her again, to the detriment of others in the class, where I'd try to help someone, and then she'd target me. Meanwhile, when others actually misbehaved or got homework, she didn't really bother. Story 57. There was a couple in our class. They were often caught together in the act. The guy was actually the son of the vice principal, which is the only thing that kept him at bay from suspension. Once the vice principal caught the girl, actually with someone else, she became so mad that she grabbed the other guy by his ear into the principal's office and returned to the girl to call her a slew of inappropriate names and gold digger and accused her of almost failing school. She did all this in front of the whole crowd that had accumulated in the corridor. Another time when we had sex ed, the teacher began to explain how condoms work. Class clown said, "Sir, could you practically explain this to us, please?" The whole class starts laughing and halts only when the teacher says, "If only your new lady meets me after class. The practical will really help her pass the exams." Apparently the class clown was dating the famous girl. Story 58. The 7th grade teacher I was interning under while I was earning my master's in teaching. She obviously hated teaching and was snarky and unpleasant pretty much every day. One day she completely lost her temper over something small and went off on the class for a good 10 minutes at full volume. Told them that there were sticks in the mud smarter than they were. Their parents were idiots for birthing them in the first place. They should be ashamed by how stupid they were, but she doubted they even had enough cognition to recognize it. It was horrendous. She got so loud that the teacher across the hall came in to see what was going on. He stood there, waited for her to finish, then proceeded to face the students and politely rephrase everything she had said. At least one student was crying by the end of it. F that place, man. Story 59. I was working as a substitute teacher for a math class, 98% free and reduced lunch school, co-taught special ed class. The special ed co-teacher knew way more about geometry than me, so she took charge on teaching the lessons. But of course the kids were effing with her. So my job was to patrol the class, nip stuff in the bud, redirect kids before they got the whole class going. That was going great. They were, on the whole, some pretty good kids. One of them took out some M&Ms. I asked her to put them away, please, and she said why. I pointed to the class rules that said no eating. She put them away. Co-teacher sees this and just melts down, tears running down her face, screams at the student and then the class for about 5 minutes. The highlight of the tirade was when she told them they'd all amount to nothing and weren't even worth a job at McDonald's flipping burgers. I, of course, called for backup here. She marched all the students out of class, declaring that they needed to learn how to act in class and they'd start all over again. At this point, 2 other teachers and the principal showed up. Long story short, she made the class go back in and then back to the hallway 4 times total, screaming at them the whole time, crying, face bright red, and guess what the administration did about this? Yeah, nothing at all. Story 60. We had a teacher, really young, mid-20s guy in his 2nd year of teaching, get fired because he slapped a girl in the butt. Naturally, the girl got mad. She had a bit of a reputation, and to avoid the shaming, I'm just going to say she cheated on a lot of people and slept around a lot. Nobody really cared, we just knew she had done it, and she owned it. Nice person, though, but anyway, somehow or another, this teacher, who taught pre-cal, had no reaction when the girl got mad. He just goes, "Huh, I thought you were the girl in school who liked that. Figured you'd go for it. Oh well." The girl rightfully slapped the ever-living crap out of him and just called 911 instead of addressing the school. That was probably a smart move considering we were a huge football school and that teacher was a coach. Honestly, the school probably wouldn't have done crap. They let the head coach say a ton of racist stuff, but they never fired him because he's good at bringing in fans for the football games. I even hated how gross that school is. Yeah, let's just say Coach Predator didn't make it past lunch that day. Story 61. It was maybe 4th grade. It was an old Karen-haired lady that would retire at the end of the year. She was very impatient, old-fashioned. This was for 2003, mind you, and tended to give us a hard time because she was tired and moody at the day. There were many times she would just say, "You won't have recess because I'm behind on the classes." Mind you, we were all very well behaved, so it wasn't our fault. Also, the days the PE teacher wasn't at the school, she would just make us open our math textbooks and do some exercises because she didn't want to watch us do PE. There were 2 major things that happened. One day, one girl was stressed. She was the second of the class. She was seriously amazing and also my first crush. Because she missed a homework and didn't do well on an activity, it was 17 years ago, I'm sorry, and she started crying. The teacher, responsible for a group of 10-year-olds, mind you, started saying to her in a taunt, "Oh, you gonna cry? Little baby gonna cry?" The second big thing was one day we were struggling to understand what she was saying, and she got angry. We weren't following her class and just said, "Just because you're stupid, you're not gonna have recess." I'm not joking, I'm not lying, she said that. This led to my defiant 10-year-old butt to her and said, "Teacher, I don't think this is fair. Everyone here is trying their best and you should respect that." That led to her, completely flabbergasted, call my mom and say, "In 35 years of teaching, I have never had a student say this to me. I honestly don't know if I should compliment you or give him a written warning." It hits different when you work in education, to be honest. Story 62. I had an 8th grade science teacher that would hand out worksheets and then sit back deep in his chair with a big, wide open newspaper in front of him. He would occasionally look out to some of the girls in the class sometimes, turn back to his paper, and the paper would jiggle slightly. He would yell if anyone got out of their seat or approached his desk. We always had to use the far door to use the restroom and not the one next to his desk. One girl claimed that she accidentally surprised him when she went to his desk to ask a question about a worksheet and had his hand in his zipper in his pants. He was, massaging himself the whole year. We were all afraid of him because he was ex-military teaching at a private Catholic school and had a heck of a temper. I was told that some students from another class complained to admin, but it was brushed under the rug as rumors and baseless due to the lack of evidence and no one else was speaking up. Truth is, we were just scared of the dude. Story 63. When I remember this now, it sounds fake as F, but I swear it did happen. When I was in year 6, age 10, our teacher went on maternity leave but suffered a miscarriage. Don't ask us how our kids knew it, but we knew. But somehow, I'm sure we even signed a get well soon card. We liked our teacher and genuinely felt bad for her, and we were protective of her in that way and only a class full of kids that can be. It was also a small school, only 1 class per year. We had a string of supply teachers for a few months during this time, one of whom was terrible. Could not control a class, and we were a bit of a handful. Nothing major but the usual talking during class, not paying attention, not respecting supply teachers. One day, terrible supply teacher was complaining about our behavior, and she asked something like, "What happened to your regular teacher?" There was an awkward pause, and then one kid said, tactfully, "She's ill." Supply teacher, "Well, you probably made her ill." Dude, crap hit the fan. Almost every kid in the class was shouting. You couldn't make out the words. You could just hear the righteous indignation of 30 children yelling. It was a wonderful thing. To this day, I wonder how that teacher could have said something so monumentally inappropriate and stupid. We also had an Australian supply teacher for a bit who, I swear, spent one lesson teaching us how to catch and restrain a crocodile, and also taught us that male crocodiles have a flat chicken, which, what the heck, never knew. Story 64. My brother was struggling with a disability throughout most of high school, and almost never in class because of chronic migraines, severe IBS, and what we discovered senior year to be a sinus cyst the size of a baseball. His English teacher, who was also disabled, refused to accommodate his struggles. The teacher insulted him in front of the class when he wasn't there, accusing him of faking it. When he was, he went right up to him and told him he received a 0 on a presentation that he was not informed of due to his absence. Legally, teachers are supposed to give students as much time to finish the missing assignments as they were absent. He basically told my brother, in front of all of his friends, that because of his circumstances, he would never pass his class or graduate. Last month, my baby brother graduated 5th of 130 in his class, a higher GPA ranking than all 3 of his older siblings combined, and he was in excruciating pain most of the time with every teacher and the principal against him for daring to have a disability at his age. Story 65. Another fun one. In grade 6, we had a sex ed class. Where I grew up, we had sex ed every year since grade 3, where the girls and the boys were split into different rooms, but they had a male instructor teaching the girls and a female instructor teaching the boys. So all the girls and I are in the library. We have Mr. D reading off his notes about menstruation. As he gets to the part about symptoms, he stops and says, "This is stupid. PMS doesn't even exist. Women just make this crap up to get out of responsibilities and to manipulate men into doing their building." When I say that all heck broke loose, I mean it. Myself and a bunch of my classmates snapped and started yelling at him about how he's wrong. Other girls started throwing books at him. One girl took out her tampons and started throwing them around the library, and a couple other girls barricaded the doors so he couldn't escape. He ended up jumping out of the first floor window and ran away screaming how women are crazy, female dogs, and we're all stupid. Once he was gone, we cleaned up the library and continued the discussion amongst ourselves. Story 66. I had a 6th grade biology teacher go on a screaming rant at me because my binder was unorganized. She didn't understand how I could have such good grades in her class while having papers everywhere. The fact was, I just got it. I found it fun and interesting. I could go into a test with barely any studying and get 17 out of 20. In France, that's a really good grade. But she didn't understand how I could do that with a messy binder, so she was just screaming and throwing pieces of paper into order in front of the whole class. Meanwhile, it felt like I was underwater. I couldn't really hear what she was saying. I could see her lips move, but couldn't understand the words. Finally, she says something. I didn't answer, so she snapped her fingers in my face saying, "Well?" Not knowing what else to do, I agreed. Not knowing what else to do, I agreed. She got this look of vicious satisfaction on her face that I'd never seen before. It wasn't until later when my friends asked me why I confessed to cheating that I realized what she'd asked me. That time, I told my parents about what my teacher did. They confronted her and the principal. After that, she gave me a public apology, and she was my biggest fan. Story 67. 1. One time my class failed a biology test, like horribly bad. A few students did well, but others got 20%. The teacher then went to show the marks of every single student, publicly shaming every single student. She then proceeded to use profanity to explain the marks. Before this moment, everyone liked this teacher, and she was actually nice. Took until the end of the semester before people could laugh about it. 2. And in a chemistry, the teacher, different than the first, had it out for one student in my class. I don't know why, but she'd always make fun of the student, indirectly, as in never saying who it is, but we could all figure it out, calling them cocky and confident and putting them down because of getting poor marks. Another instance in this class, she started making fun of an unnamed student for failing a test, made fun of their horrible attempts to answer questions and performing various steps wrong, on paper, during tests. She photocopied the test, put it on the projector, blacked out the name, and showed it to the entire class while she continued to make fun of it. The second I looked closely at it, I realized it was my test. Most people didn't know whose test it was. Later on, I asked someone if that test was theirs. They said no, and someone came back being like, "I thought it was you," which I denied as hard as I could. Guess I threw them off by asking whose test it was. Yes, they never clued in on this being a variation of whoever smelt it, dealt it. Story 68. When I was 10, I had a teacher that was great. Very knowledgeable and genuinely cared about our learning. He kind of was like that one uncle that was loud and happy, but when he got mad, you knew it was serious. On the last week of school, right when the temperatures were getting hot, all the windows were open in the classroom door which looks into the hallway. Per usual, morning the PA was on and the classroom was reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. In the middle of the pledge, our teacher looks down the hallway and yells, "You, get over here, now!" A few seconds later, a child just a little older than me walks in absolutely terrified. The kid was scared. His head was down and confused. At this point, we, the classroom, were just as confused as the kid. There was a long, dramatic pause. Then my teacher let him have it. "Do you not know what is playing on the overhead PA? That's the Pledge of Frickin' Allegiance. You are to stop walking and pay your respects." At this point, this kid is straight sobbing. My teacher continued, "Have you ever went to war for your country? Huh? Have you? No? I have. Have you ever had to hold your best friend in your arms as he died for your country? Huh? No? I have." At this point, the classroom still standing is in total, "What the F?" Our teacher then at normal volume tells him, "Now, you are going to recite it word for word in front of the classroom since you didn't stop to do it in the hallway. Do I make myself clear?" As ordered, the kid starts reciting it, sniffling and wiping his tears with his left hand. He finishes. When he was done, my teacher says, "Good. Now go back to class and tell your teacher what happened." 10 minutes later, that kid's teacher walks in, starts yelling at him as to why he did what he did. His answer? Someone had to teach him respect, something you don't teach in your classroom. At this point, all of us in the classroom had our mouths drop to the floor. They both walk out into the hallway and they close the door behind them. They shouldn't even have bothered closing the door because we could hear them yelling so loud anyways. When he returned to the classroom, he gave us an impromptu dissection of the Pledge of Allegiance, word for word, and what it meant to us. 6th grade Mr. Kane was no joke. Story 69. In elementary, my school started accepting students from a recently closed down inner city school, and the shift was immediately noticeable. My docile gym teacher was fresh out of college and decided she had enough and wanted to share some secrets with us. She let us know Santa, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, and God weren't real, and that after this class is over, she's going to get her a new, better job. Side note, I watched this school replace 3 white female home teachers, all fresh-faced and eager to educate the future of America in less than 1 school year. All of them erupted mid-class and basically had to be dragged back into our classroom. Admittedly, some kids were practically terrorists. One kid took the wrong backpack to class and brought his dad's entire weed stash to work, and another girl stole our teacher's car keys to get back at her for failing her. A teacher had to fight a student's big brother after they found out where he lived because the kid's mom was getting fines for him not coming to school. Ultimately, we got Mrs. Jameson, a middle-aged single black mom who was the definition of not to be effed with. I thank her for setting me straight and saving me from a lifetime of being a statistic, as I'm sure others do. Story 70. My world history teacher in 9th grade spent an entire period going over what guys find most attractive in females and writing it in chronological order on the whiteboard. The first 2 most attractive qualities a woman can possess were boobs and butts. Last was face and personality. He went into the lecture about how being in good shape matters most because that's the very first thing anyone will ever notice. This teacher was just so happens to also be a female dog and complained that he can never land an attractive girl because they are all gold diggers. He's the type of person who thinks everyone else is the problem but not him. I took a picture of the board and showed it to our principal. Unfortunately, nothing happened. He was friends with the dean. He made the rest of the semester torture for me because he found out I was the one who complained. He also coached high jump in the girls' junior varsity basketball. Last I heard, he ended up getting fired because there was evidence that he slept with one of the girls on his team who obviously was a minor. I wish my parents did something about it when I told them everything. Once the dean brushed it aside, they gave up. One of my friends that did high jump quit just because he was touching her inappropriately. I don't even know how he got hired to begin with. Complete tool. Story 71. 8th grade teacher was a notorious drinker with tenure. She was fired 2 years after us, but about once every few weeks she would be so particularly blasted, she would make us watch episodes of The Frugal Gourmet while she just sat there at her desk and just blankly stared at crap. No cell phones at the time, so she wasn't doing anything but being wasted, just sitting there. At the end of the school year, she made kids clean up around the classroom, including her private office in the class. Pretty sure those 2 girls counted 8 vodka bottles they were throwing out and so much rabbit poop. She just let the thing hop around class and had crap everywhere. Don't remember anything particularly offensive she said, but she was a very open and obvious lesbian, and I vaguely remember her making lewd comments about some of the girls. At the time, I was like, dang right, Miss Petty. 2 years later, she got so drunk they found her just wandering the halls aimlessly while her class was alone. I believe she was suspended with pay for about 8 months and let go at the end of the school year. That tenure is a heck of a thing. Story 72. This was university. We had a communications professor and a renowned guy. Really, like one of the academics in the field. But also he was, crazy a little. 2 moments stand out. When I was in university, I did some PR work for a local theater company, and I taught some publicity seminars for local artists. He found out about that and was really into framing me in lectures as a PR guy. Once he was talking about how Nixon wanted to nuke Vietnam, but Kissinger said it would be bad publicity. Bad publicity. You're a PR guy. Would you spin that press release for us? Take that. I probably wouldn't lead with that. No. Another time he was talking about Russia for some reason, and he goes, there's nothing in Russia but idiots and thieves, and then turns to the Russian girl in our class and goes, right? Am I right? And she goes, yeah, kinda. I have no idea what I learned in that class, but I definitely remember a lot of moments. Story 73. I'm from PR, and private school education is trash. I've been to 4 of them. I've seen teachers do the following. Yell cuss words out in frustration. Yell at students and break them down to tears. Kick a student's backpack. Slam a podium on the ground in anger. A principal called a student a pile of crap. A teacher helping students humiliate another student. The faculty putting all the good, successful students in one classroom and all the bad ones, myself included, in another just to get good ratings for the school. I've seen principal assistants play dumb just to throw the victim student under the bus and save their butts. Me, again. I went on a summer field trip to Florida where my math and science teachers were regularly using cuss words and talking crap. The list goes on, and these private schools act like they're the best PR has to offer by price gouging the parents. Can't even imagine what public school is like. Story 74. Had a grade 12 math class in a portable. Only a dozen kids in the class because most other kids taking a 12th year math were in a more advanced class. I just needed to pass. So with such a small class, you can imagine that things got pretty informal and we often had group conversations about whatever. I don't for the life of me remember what I was asking about, but I asked the room just generally if anyone was planning to watch a particular show or movie that was airing that weekend. The teacher looked at me dead in the eye and said aloud to the quiet room, no, everyone else has friends. I just sat there stunned. I was a pretty shy, kind of socially awkward kid with a family that moved a ton while I was growing up. I was lonely a lot, but I still tried to be friendly and social. I was devastated, but I kind of just let it go. I'm pretty sure he meant it as some kind of joke, like he was razzing me or something. He never did anything else like that, and he never seemed to have any ill will towards me. He probably realized later it was actually kind of a horrible thing to say, but I've never forgotten that moment. Story 75. I had a literature teacher in high school that told us all that he had once been in a cult and also another time had been kidnapped. 85% sure the kidnapping was related to the cult activity. But the worst thing he told us is that he was able to convince the school administration to allow his cult to hold meetings in our auditorium. He got out of the cult at some point, but he clearly learned some tricks and tips from it, because every single fresh class of students he had would start the semester hating him, and by the end, they'd all love him. He would play hot and cold, and you never knew if he was going to start yelling and standing on tables or reward you for your work. I had a lot of trouble with him because he didn't believe in mental illness and didn't want to accommodate me. I sometimes wonder if I'd been indoctrinated if I wasn't in therapy. Story 76. A chemistry teacher of mine, class 12, when students are almost at the cusp of passing out and are usually very chill. So this professor usually likes being cooler and takes pot shots at students a lot, especially females. So one sudden day, a girl who was chatting during a lecture found herself to be in his crosshairs. What he did was made her stand up, described to her how she was not paying attention to the class, hence will score bad grades, not get a job, and somehow this will translate to a failed marriage and a bad spouse, who will come home drunk and beat the crap out of her every night. Moreover, the society too will shun her and look down upon her. She was a pretty tough girl, but this legit made her burst into tears. Naturally, there was a complaint to the principal, but nothing much happened further than that. Sad. Anyway, pretty effed up preaching by the teacher. Story 77. In 5th grade, my teacher was recounting a funny bath story with her grandson when he was a baby and said, he pointed down at his chicken and said, "Pecker?" And I laughed so hard. Then in 10th grade in English class, I forget how, but we began to talk about race, and some folks were being loud in the hallway. And my teacher asked the only black girl in the class, if you were to think about the people in the hallway, do you picture them as black or... The girl responded with, I guess. And the teacher kept pushing her, saying stuff like, do you think affirmative action is beneficial? And a bunch of white kids were decrying how unfair it was that some black kids got scholarships and they couldn't get it. And I remember the girl being silent and just shrugging, getting visibly nervous. I think back on how I should have supported the girl. I am so disappointed in myself for not saying something to the teacher. She was a huge idiot. Story 78. There was an incident in my high school psychology class where a student was filming a teacher without their knowledge. This was one of those teachers who liked to cut up a lot with the class but was ultimately a pretty good guy. I'm sure the kid was filming because the teacher was often very funny. However, when the teacher found out, he went ballistic. The kid ended up in ISS for 2 days. That should have been it, right? Nope. On day 3, when the boy was back in class, the teacher spent the majority of the class tearing into the kid, ripping him a new one in front of everyone about how inappropriate it was for him to be filming without permission and how, taken out of context, the video could have gotten the teacher in trouble. This went on and on and on. Finally, another student got sick of it and told the teacher his reaction was more inappropriate than the original offense. The teacher apologized to the student who called them out on it, but never to the boy he'd humiliated or the class for wasting our time. The whole ordeal was so overblown and stupid it really destroyed my faith in an otherwise good teacher. Story 79. So here it goes. We had a lockdown in 8th grade during PE and all the boys go into the locker room. Well, you know what happens next. We're all horsing around when the football coach comes in, and oh man is he mad. He rants about, the kids in Sandy never took their lockout seriously and look what happened to them, and stuff like that. We're all pretty quiet because this dude has a red face and he's pretty intimidating. And as he leaves, my idiot friend decides it would be funny to say, my chicken itches, as he's closing the door. Yeah. The teacher whips around and runs straight up to him and screams about how he's a dumb idiot. He punches the wall repeatedly right next to him. He threw over a chair and we're all in one corner while this kid is in the other. I would have crapped my pants, but my friend just stayed quiet until he left. I would have crapped my pants again. The teacher got fired later for punching a kid on the football team. Yikes. Story 80. When I was in college, one of my professors came in and said he had an epiphany. He went on to describe how when he was on vacation, he saw one of his former students. The student was successful, had gotten married, and had 3 children. My teacher went on for 10 minutes about how he realized in that moment that they were real people, that when he left the school, we would go out and do real things, and that we didn't just exist to take his class and then disappear. Other things he said were like, this is tyranny, not a democracy, and you have no say in anything. I don't always tell you the truth, but today I'm going to. He would also get mad if we were looking down for too long in a notebook or at a computer, so note-taking was dang near impossible. He would randomly demand all computers to be closed, so we would listen to him while half of us took notes on our laptops. There was a mandatory field trip overnight camping on the mountain, and one girl asked what the girls expecting their period those days should do to prepare. He said we could discuss our needs as females once the boys were gone, and figure it out, and refused to help us or let us mention it ever again. Us more outdoorsy girls helped her. I could go on, but the post asked for one thing, so my rant is over. Story 81. I have a lot of bad teachers growing up. I've been called stupid, a waste, and other things. However, the worst had to have been in 4th grade. I went to the bathroom, and when I got back, the teacher was in the center of the room. She turned to me with a cocky voice, told me they were all talking about me. Some of the kids snickered. I didn't know fully what happened until later. The bullies of the class started to get aggressive. After telling the teacher about it, she hauled me out in front of everyone. She called me a tattletale. A bully told me later that she said they could do anything they wanted to me because I was worthless, and the teacher said so. This could have been BS considering, but I do know what was actually said. How even after the teacher never got on anyone's case for treating me like crap, this and thinking back on how she was in no doubt some shape or form giving them permission to bully me. Story 82. I had a high school teacher who had all but given up. He was the computer science teacher, but for some reason, one year they assigned him to teach a couple periods of basic algebra. I was in this class, comprised mostly of the class clowns and slackers. I was just a quiet person who sucked at math. It was a teacher's nightmare. All the biggest pains in the butt were in one class together. He couldn't keep their attention. Everything he said was met with a joke or a smart remark. You could see the light dying behind his eyes. Eventually, he developed some coping skills, which included screaming at the top of his lungs to get everyone's attention when the class had spun into a distracted mess. He would also create his own word problems in order to engage the class, that he would start like, Johnny has 2 ounces of pot. He had gone completely off the rails. This class basically broke his spirit and his brain. Story 83. In a class on intercultural communications, my professor was trying to talk about diversity. At one point, she asked what yellow meant in Jesus Loves the Little Children. This was a state school with a quarter of the student population being international students from China or Korea, mind you. But the whole thing completely fell apart when she had the following exchange. Professor, are you gay or straight? Student, yes. The next day she came in and told us she was very upset because we weren't respecting her. We all stopped listening after that, and she asked what she could do differently. When we pointed out she had straight up asked a kid his sexual orientation in the middle of class, she didn't remember doing it. And then when the entire class agreed that she had, she was so ashamed she broke down into tears. She did become much more professional after that. Story 84. Oh, I have so many stories. In French class, we were learning to talk about how our parents travel to work. The teacher called on a boy in my class, who was the only Asian person in the entire school, to say aloud what he had written. She then stopped him and said, Never mind, I bet your parents only have to go up and down the stairs to get to work. Now, we were only 12 at the time, but I didn't understand what the teacher meant at first because then I realized she thought and just assumed because he was Chinese that his parents owned a takeaway shop and lived upstairs. He did not. The same teacher lost it with another boy in my class a different time and said to him, "Now I know why you were an only child. Your parents couldn't deal with another annoying one after you," and made him drag his desk out of the class and sit in the corridors. Also had a supply teacher for religious education class once couldn't control the class. She had a complete meltdown when someone picked up the little Jesus statue and ran out of the school crying. I'm still not sure what happened there. In geography class, we had a supply teacher once and everyone switched from their allocated seats until the normal teacher was spotted in the corridor. When the supply teacher left class, everyone scrambled to get back to their proper seats and the supply teacher came back and obviously noticed. She started screaming at us that we're all going to burn in hell. We were going nowhere in life. I'm pretty sure she was an alcoholic. She used to turn up to classes really late and she had her dress on backwards once. Okay, I'm done. My music teacher also showered with the 14-year-old students on a school trip, but that's a whole other story. Story 85. Wow, I really wish I had seen this earlier because I have a stellar one. In 8th grade English, we had a substitute teacher, some dude in like his 60s. The teacher left Little Women for us to watch. So he puts that on and we watch until there's a scene where they're struggling with the corset. This man then pauses the movie, stands up and asks the girls to raise their hand if they are a size 2 or 4. A few girls raise their hands awkwardly. He says, "Now, back then girls like you might not have had to wear a corset." He then proceeded to place his hand on my shoulder and go, "Now girls like this, they'd probably have to always wear one." I wanted to sink into the effing floor. I was 14 and was naturally cripplingly self-conscious about my body. I was probably like a size 10 or something, so I thought I was incredibly fat. It was one of those moments where I didn't realize until much later how horrifyingly inappropriate that was. I genuinely wondered if I'd misremembered because of how outlandish it sounds when I tell it to an adult. But when you're 14, that stuff doesn't really occur to you. Story 86. Not really the teacher saying, but what he was supporting. Setting: Catholic university with a great media lab. That's what hooked me. Me, atheist. Background: there were 4 compulsory subjects painted as humanities, but in reality they were shameless religion indoctrination. Teacher appointed teams to research other religions to make as a presentation. There were obviously other very mainstream ones. Catholicism was not one, because he brought the school's priest to do it, which fair enough. You have to know that even if it's a Catholic university, a very big percentage are not Catholics. They were mostly born Catholic, but don't practice or don't care or don't believe. Most of us were brain dead the whole time. Just not really paying attention, thinking what we needed to do around the day, using the time to plan and advance other assignments from classes that were actually in our curriculum. Priest starts the presentation by saying, all religions have a percentage of truth. Percentage? Yes, wait for it. That Buddhism and Hinduism had 70%, Judaism and Islam 80%, Christianity 90%, and Catholicism was the only one with 100%. Guys, I choked, and without warning, it was loud. Teacher at the end remarked the percentages. Believing or not aside, where do you even consult these percentages? Story 87. In like 7th or 8th grade, I was taking a social studies test and this kid in front of me was complaining in the middle of the test that he didn't have any more pencil lead. So my teacher told him to hurt himself and write the rest of his test with his blood. I was super emo at the time, and at the time I was totally enraged over that comment, but I didn't do anything about it. Looking back on it now, I find it hilarious, but I know it was 100% wrong to say that crap to a 13-year-old boy. I always hated him though, and that class. The teacher always made these weird comments about me being emo, and the kids just loved to randomly chat at me up in the middle of the class, and I was a crap student, but it always infuriated me. He loved to just turn around in the middle of a class or test and talk to me with no point to it. Story 88. Finally, my band directors were troubled people. They often loved to express themselves and their opinions to prove a point, and that was stupid to begin with. Secondary woodwind director's words: "You guys aren't trying. Just try. It's like domestic abuse. Just get out of the relationship. Trump is not a racist and you can't prove it. There's nothing to prove." This was after writing MAGA on the board during leadership camp and asked if this offended anyone. By the way, my school was predominantly Hispanic and black. I was literally the only white student, and I'm mixed. They were white as heck. I argued with him in front of everyone, and he undermined it by talking about everything but the point I was making. You guys play in the sun, and then you can't just sit and watch the other bands? Lots of context for this one. Immediately after said competition, we all sat down and he bickered about how they took us up for a park for lunch. And of course, being kids, we play in the freaking park, and it had a lot of trees. Then we went back to the open stadium with metal bleachers to watch 20 other groups. But we left early because too many of us were at concessions, like literally everyone else, cooling off. Other things he said included him talking about my section to other sections and saying how we couldn't take criticism because we were too fragile. Pretty ironic considering before, when I complained about his spiels to principal man, he bickered out and ran off to the middle school for a few weeks at a time. Things the primary head director said: "Without religion, where do morals come from?" Bless his heart, he's a nice guy. You guys sounded like taking a piece of bologna and throwing it on the floor. Oh, what do you get? Bologna on the floor. My own director has said so much stupid crap, just not stupid enough to remember. I do remember when he tried towards my sister who was in the program and graduated when I moved up to that school. Predator F. Every breath he took was a gift from me to him for 4 years, and he had the effing audacity to treat us, my section, like we didn't know any better, yet expected highly of us. I mean, we did win our own competitions, but freaking everything about that school. F almost all the teachers and F the band directors. Story 89. I was a chubby kid in 3rd grade and new to town. At the time, South Carolina was 50th in education, and they had me going to a 4th grade math class because my actual class was too easy. I'm sat in front of the class, and the 4th graders are all told that I'm from the north, and that's why I'm there. On the second day, I get stabbed in the back with a compass. I yelp. The teacher yells at me for interrupting. I say I've just been stabbed, and I show her the blood. She, of course, already doesn't like me and orders me to come up to the front of the class and take off my shirt because she doesn't believe me. At this point, she sees my bleeding back and lets me go back to my desk. No apology, no punishment for the kid that stabbed me. No care that she had a half an unclothed, chubby kid standing in front of her class. She just said, "Oh, not a terrible phrase, but the worst thing I ever heard." Story 90. I could go into stories about my math teacher cussing us out, but I prefer the story about my animation teacher laughing at a very inappropriate joke. He was quizzing us on 3D animation, paraphrasing questions to get through it faster. One comes up that says, on an animation skeleton, the point where 2 bones joined is called a blank, but the teacher paraphrases it to, where did 2 bones meet? This one kid, not normally a troublemaker, blurts out, at a gay bar. Keep in mind, this was a heavily Mormon class in Utah, so of course everyone got it and laughed for a good 10 minutes. The teacher, who acted super innocent most of the time, started laughing too. He tried to hide it but couldn't for long. Instead, he went to the back of the room for a few minutes so that he could let out the explosive laughter that was hiding under the surface. Before he came out, he said, "That's not the answer," before having to go back for more laughter. Story 91. I had an anatomy teacher in high school who would always tell us stories about his life. The stories usually had a plot of him or someone else being a complete idiot or a plot centering around a life lesson. And he told us a lot. Things like his mother dying and then him casually meeting the doctor who tried saving her after having a heart attack in the grocery store. Things like his divorce, his parents' divorce, his time in dental school, his breakup with his girlfriend. Interesting stories from his time as a dentist. He would get very personal. He also held us to a very high standard, and if we didn't reach that standard, he'd get upset. And the louder he got, the darker of personal information he'd divulge. One day we all came into class and he decided to show us the failure to communicate scene from Cool Hand Luke. After giving us some quick commentary on the movie and recommending it, he then explains to us how there had been a failure to communicate our understanding of the information on our last practical. He goes off for about 10 minutes on how he's disappointed in our performance and how he's not going to make the class easier just because we're not doing well as he wants. At one point he says, "My wife divorced me for over 20 years. One of the reasons she said was because I was too loud. As you can see, I'm still loud. I'm 6'2". I'm from Brooklyn. I'm loud. I didn't change for my wife and I'm not changing for you guys." Story 92. I don't know how well this would fit, but I was in a public school in my early years, then went to a private school in my 3rd year as the teacher said I was excelling beyond the kids in school and would just be held back due to the standard of education. My first day in this new private school, and my former primary teacher had made no civil announcement to any of the new students' arrival, just asked the old students how their holidays went and such, and then continued to announce the register, to which the new students were given some sort of introduction. Not a moment later, and class had began, to which I was asked a series of math questions, and got flustered when asked to multiply. This was never something I had learned in my old school, and the teacher just stared at me dead in the eyes, and I said that we hadn't learned how to multiply in school, and by that time all the kids were laughing at me, and the teacher herself even had a giggle. She never did take the time to teach me, but ensured I took the ridicule from the class. We had just come out of apartheid a few years prior, so I only figured out just how racist a lot of the teachers were in those early years after I had gotten out of that school. I had someone tell me the only reason they like me is because I have a cool calculator. Can you imagine that? Too long didn't read. I hadn't been taught how to do multiplication in public school, and my private school teacher showed no concern towards educating me and let the class laugh at me instead as she joined. Story 93. In elementary school, grade 7 I believe, we began learning sex ed. There we were, a co-ed class sitting cross-legged around a bulletin board where our teachers were going over mostly the basics, condoms, pads, tampons. As she was showing us a tampon and how it was used, one of my classmates, who had a disability, excitedly shouted out, "Oh, my mom uses those!" In hindsight, I think my teacher did her best, but could have easily ignored it. But no, instead she explains what she uses them for yeast infections. It went over most of our heads, but a good amount of us roared into laughter, because on that day, 23 or so kids learned what a yeast infection was, how to treat it, and Sophia's mom suffered from them. Every now and again I am reminded of this and cringe when it's replayed in my head. Story 94. My 8th grade history teacher was the type of teacher that put on a scary, stern front, but actually made quite a few jokes during lectures, which she was really good at it. My favorite teacher ever. One joke, we were discussing the Amazon, and there was something in the text about dolphins. Teacher said something about dolphin burgers being delicious. Everyone cracked up. I was so torn between laughing and everyone else and being appalled that I kind of started crying. He immediately became super sorry, thinking I was actually crying over the dolphins. The worst thing he ever said was the phrase, "Y'all are too young for that." And it was really quiet, more a chuckle to himself, and no one else heard him. I happened to sit at the front about a foot away from the lectern. I can't remember what the conversation had been about that prompted that comment. I do remember thinking, oh my gosh, did he really just say that? And him looking at me, realizing that I definitely heard that, and looking literally anywhere else awkwardly while I had a full-on anime blush. Story 95. Not teacher, but a professor during a calculus class. He was in his 70s. He was rambling before the lecture started and talked about how autism, hurricanes, and earthquakes are the nature's way of controlling population. Apparently, someone in the class had an autistic family member and got offended and reported him. I was randomly picked to corroborate the statements, and he had said in class in a private meeting with their HR. I felt bad because he was an old guy and probably did not understand how that could rub someone the wrong way, but it had nothing to do with calculus, so he was in the wrong there. He was a really nice guy otherwise, and one of my favorite professors who was passionate about teaching, which is rare in STEM-related classes.